willkommen zu unserem Webinar heute zum Thema Projektreifegrad als Wettbewerbsvorteil. Wir sprechen über ein sehr interessantes Thema heute und einem sehr etwas unusual Format. Ich habe nämlich eingeladen heute unseren Head of Consulting bei ILX, Mike Saville. Er spricht kein Deutsch, sondern nur Englisch. Und daher werden wir das Webinar, wie bereits angekündigt, in deutscher und englischer Sprache führen. Und wenn ihr dann später Fragen habt oder Kommentare habt, dann bitte auch in der Sprache eurer Wahl in unserem Chat eingeben. Und wir werden am Ende im letzten Teil in der Q&A-Sektion diese Fragen beantworten und ich werde so ein bisschen zwischen beiden Sprachen hin und her springen. Ich hoffe, das ist okay. Bevor wir jetzt aber weiter starten, würde ich gerne kurz etwas zu diesem Thema sagen. Projekt Maturity P3M3 ist ein Thema, was meiner Meinung nach nicht genug in Deutschland besprochen wird. Wie wichtig der Mehrwert es ist, dass die Projektprogramm- und Portfolio-Management einen gewissen Reifegrad erreichen. Gerade im Moment mit sehr vieler rasanter Änderungen ist das sehr, sehr wichtig. Und das ist mir ein fast schon persönliches Anliegen, das ein bisschen mehr im Fokus zu bringen. Aber bevor wir jetzt anfangen und der Mike beginnt, würde ich gerne uns ganz kurz vorstellen. Und zwar, wie gesagt, mein Name ist Sidra Sammi. Ich bin verantwortlich für die Geschäftsentwicklung im deutschsprachigen Markt und auch Corporate Beratung. Also ich bin Ihre erste Ansprechperson und mein Kollege Mike Saville. Hello, Mike. Thank you for being here.
Good morning, Sidra. Good to be here.
Yeah, great. So I will pass on the word in a moment to you, aber ich werde zunächst einmal kurz einen Hinweis, dass wir hier heute die Housekeeping Rules, wie man sie so schön nennt. Ihr seid während des Webinars stumm geschaltet, so stellen wir sicher, dass alle gut verstanden werden. Aber Fragen können jederzeit in dem Q&A-Bereich, da solltet ihr eine Schaltfläche haben, oder durch den Chat an uns gerichtet werden. Ich werde Mike während des Webinars auch Fragen stellen. Und wenn da eine passende Frage kommt, werde ich die vielleicht schon vorab stellen, aber ich werde sie eigentlich sammeln für die letzten 10 Minuten, wo wir dann alle durchgehen. Aber ich wäre euch sehr dankbar, wenn ihr uns Feedback gibt, wenn euch was besonders gut oder denkanstoßend erscheint. Wir haben auch eine Live-Reaktionsfunktion auf der Plattform. Die könnt ihr nutzen. Thumbs up, Smile, Glühbirne, wie immer das findet. Das ist immer sehr interessant zu sehen und Live-Reaktionen zu bekommen. Bitte folgt uns auf unseren Social-Media-Kanälen nach dem Webinar, LinkedIn oder YouTube, wo dieses Webinar nachher auch als Recording available sein wird, oder meldet euch über unsere Webseite, unseren monatlichen ILX Newsletter an. Und für jegliches Feedback sind wir euch sehr dankbar. Nach dem Webinar bekommt ihr die Möglichkeit, uns Feedback zu geben. Sagt uns gerne, was euch gefallen hat, was euch nicht gefallen hat, was wir besser machen können und auch sehr gerne Themenvorschläge. Zu welchen Themen würdet ihr in der Zukunft mehr erfahren? So, und natürlich will ich auch für diejenigen, die zum ersten Mal dabei sind, uns kurz vorstellen. Die ILX Group ist ein globaler, lokaler, verankerter Bildungs- und Beratungspartner mit über 35 Jahren Erfahrung in der Entwicklung von Fach- und Führungskompetenzen. Wir sind ein englisches Haus, aber wir verbinden internationale Reichweite mit lokalem Marktverständnis. Das heißt, auch für den deutschsprachigen Markt bin ich fokussiert darauf und habe ein Team und ein Netzwerk im deutschen Markt, in Schweiz und auch in Österreich. Und wir bieten halt mehrsprachige Portfolio aus akkreditierten Training, digitalen Lernformaten und P3M-Beratung an, ganz gezielt und ausgerichtet auf Performance, Transformation und Governance-Anforderungen. Ergänzt wird das durch individuelle Lernpfade, unser Training, was wir im Bereich Projektmanagement, Agile, IT bis hin zu KI, Daten und Leadership sehr, sehr konsequent praxis- und ergebnisorientiert ist. Und kurz gesagt, wir ermöglichen strategische Kompetenzentwicklung, die global skalierbar ist, aber lokal relevant ist. So, damit gebe ich das Wort an Mike. Mike, I hand you over.
Thank
I'm
you,
looking
Sidra.
forward to what you have to tell us today.
Okay, well, if I'd like to add my welcome to everybody who's joined us today, I'm looking forward to discussing the concept of portfolio program and project management maturity and how you can use the maturity models that we're going to describe to you today to help to enhance your projects and program success and to boost your capabilities and potentially look at the ways in which you can enhance your strategic advantage and competitiveness by refining your process. So in order to do that, and I should also say thank you also for indulging me in only speaking English, for which I apologize, but this will go a lot better if I do
You
it in
don't have to
my
apologize.
primary language. Our agenda today is I want to explain a little bit about capability, so the project program portfolio management capability, which is a measure that we can use to analyze and improve the effectiveness of our delivery. I want to tell you a little bit about the specific model that we're talking about, that is the PRINCE2 P3M3 model. P3M3, the acronym, stands for Portfolio, Program and Project Management Maturity Model. You can see that's a bit of a mouthful, so you can see why an acronym is really helpful on this occasion. And then I want to talk to you about how you can use that model to support you in the delivery of project programs and your portfolios, and how it can help to focus on the areas and opportunities for improvement that you can see that will deliver to your sort of the bottom line of your project performance, and how it can be used to focus your improvement activities and to drive the thinking about the way that your capability improves. Okay, so I'll explain a little bit about how the model can be used when we're talking about how you benchmark and then transition to progressive improvement. And then we'll take some case studies. These are organizations that ILX have worked with. Typically, these are organizations where I've been engaged with a company that is looking to add some resilience and some effectiveness to their project delivery. So we'll take the three sort of case studies which we can look at with the organizations at slightly different positions in their maturity and the work that they did to bring about the effectiveness and enhancements that enable them to deliver more successfully. And then we've got some time, hopefully, for some questions if you have some. So that's the way we're going to proceed today. Okay. So I will move us forward. So as promised, a little bit about why capability maturity matters. So I work in my role with organizations that are delivering a variety of projects, programs within sometimes multi-portfolio organizations, and there is always competition for attention, isn't there? Where are you going to focus on improvement? Is it all about outturn and bottom line? Are we needing to satisfy the needs of our stakeholders? What are the key metrics that we need to focus on in order to make sure that our projects are successful and that we deliver the benefits we're set up to achieve and that we reach the objectives that we want to do? And we might think about raising the capability of our teams through development or through training. We might look at increasing our capacity to deliver through expanding the team or integrating efficient responses like artificial agents into the way that we deliver. We might look at changing the delivery cycle or our framework focus, moving towards an agile model of delivery for some types, or sticking with a tried and tested processes. There's lots of things that we can change in response to the delivery challenge of meeting the objectives that we want. And I want to talk to you about a particular measure or a metric that we have found to be, over many years, to be proven to be a key focus for raising the capability of our project program organization. And so capability maturity in project program management is based on the idea that any organization can predict its position in terms of what you can see there. There's a little chart there which talks about a maturity curve. So any organization, any project or program organization would find themselves somewhere on that curve. And you can see that there are 5 sort of bands within that piece, with level 1 labeled awareness of process being the entry level in terms of sort of lowest predictable performance, up to level 5, the optimized process being the sort of the peak of the journey and maximum performance. And there are characteristics of any project or program organization that would position them somewhere on that curve. Okay? With the idea being that the higher up the curve you judge your organization to be, the more predictable the outcome, the more clear you will be when forecasting the result for a project, or committing to a project, or deciding on the framework that you're going to use to deliver the project. The more predictable it is, depending on the maturity of your process. And this is an idea, as we'll see in a moment, that's been around for the best part of 20-25 years through its sort of formal evolution. So this is not a new measure, and it's one that's consistently been delivering positive results for project and program portfolio delivery in particular throughout that period. You can see that there's on the right hand side of the screen at the moment, there's some research that was been done. I think this is from the Project Management Institute 5 or 6 years ago, looking at the impact on strategic project delivery of higher or versus lower maturity. And we can see that, for example, at the top one there, almost double the average number of projects will be completed on time in an organization with higher maturity compared to one with lower. And what it doesn't say completed ahead of time. It doesn't say that we suddenly get hugely quicker. What it says is that we are confident in our resourcing and our prediction and our planning, so that we know that a project like this takes about this sort of time, and we plan accordingly to deliver it in that way. Similarly, average percentage of projects completed within budget. Do you want to complete your projects within budget? I think generally that's our preferred option, right? And by enhancing our process maturity, we understand that the kind of projects that we have on the slate today will be affected by these budget variations. They will be likely to be impacted in this way. We understand what our capability is to deliver projects of that nature. We understand how they might be impacted by threats to the budget, so by accelerating cost controls or unanticipated costs. And we know what the focus is for managing them, so that they remain within our predicted budget where possible. If they look to exceed it, then we control it and manage it that way, but we have those controls available. So you might see average percentage of projects experiencing scope creep to be, again, a more mature organization has a proven ability and has learned from their experiences around how we deal with variations to scope, how we might manage unanticipated changes, how we refine requirements at different points in the project or program life cycle to ensure that we are resilient to those potential challenges that might come around, variations or changes in scope, or how we're adopting a more customer-focused approach that enables us to deliver. The maturity of our process, our capability maturity, is a key indicator of our ability to perform and to deliver the planned successful project. So and this is what underpins, as we're all project organizations, we're all delivering our strategy through the medium of project and programs. It is this measure that can help us to consolidate our delivery and deliver the advantages that we're investing in and paving the way to delivering our successful strategy. As the summary of the PMI report says, the higher your maturity score, the more likely you are to achieve your organizational objectives and be successful. So this is the fundamental measure. Sorry, Sidra.
So Mike, just a quick question, because would because projects are have a limited time frame. So, and I'm not a project manager, so my questions are not coming from a project management perspective, but my understanding, speaking to project managers every day. So, can we say that the higher the maturity, the better your processes are? So, for example, on your right-hand graph, you're saying average, percentage of project completed on time, within budget, original goals. So, no matter how much you have to maybe adjust your project, because projects move constantly, you are able. So it's suitable for VUCA environment. The higher your maturity is, the higher these outside influences are not going to impact your results.
I think we obviously in a VUCA environment we cannot control all of the changes that might impact on our project. Many of those things will be in our environment and outside of our control, but a mature process is able to adapt and respond to changes
Yeah.
in order to maintain the right control environment for to deliver the project. And you can see that the maturity curve is characterized by improvements in the agility and the adaptability of our process in order to make sure that we are not derailed by a rigid response to different types of change. We can talk about that a little bit more as we go on.
Okay,
Okay,
cool.
sure. I will move forward if I'm able to. Okay. There we go. So I want to talk a little bit about the origins of development. We're all project folks here. We're all familiar with the project delivery environment, and so it's good to be clear that the P3M3 model, the PRINCE2 P3M3 model that we're discussing today, is intended to support us in our delivery, in our portfolio program project delivery. It's not. It is a management maturity model, but it's for the management of those projects and programs that we're engaged in delivery. Okay, so we know that there have been models that guide us in our delivery for many years. So there are a couple of examples on the slide, but the total quality management environment is developed in leading part by the Toyota organization, of course. Has given us the ability to focus on those activities across our business, whether that's in management or operations or production or in human resources or in all finance, in all elements, and to generate improvement. TOGAF is a framework I'm sure many of you have come across about, that sets out good practices for development, and we're all familiar with the ISO international management standards, things like 9001 that embed in our management systems the focus on quality of delivery and being prepared for engaging with the challenges that the business throws at us. But these are generic management standards. Okay, and in around about 2001, 2002, the Software Engineering Institute at Carnegie Mellon University, New York, put forward a model that can go beyond the sort of general business enhancement perspective to dealing with delivery, and to talk specifically about what is the capability of an organization. It grew up in part because, as many of you will be quite clear, the late 2000s, the early 2000s, sorry, characterized by the rapid expansion of software companies dealing with the internet boom, and then the expansion beyond that into the dominant organizations that we still see in the internet, the digital world today, and their purpose was in part to figure out which of those startup organizations would survive and which were purely going to be successful based on the CVs that were involved with them. So if you could see, if you were assessing a business opportunity that was being headed up by an Elon Musk, for example, you could see that the quality of the CV would indicate that they were worth investing in. But what about the other aspects of the business? What about their delivery capability? This is and the Carnegie Mellon Software Engineering Institute built a predictive model that would enable to say these software companies have the characteristics that mean that they are likely to still be in business in 2 or 3 years. They're worth investing in. Okay? And that speaks very clearly to a challenge that was being felt across the world in terms of how do we judge the ability of our projects to deliver. And so the UK Government Office of Telecommunications, and it's part of the APM group, invested quite quickly around about 2003 in the development of a project-specific maturity model. PM3, as it was known, enabled sponsors of projects, like the UK government, for example, to look at the very different major projects that they were running, whether that's to engage with a multi-supplier European defence project like the Eurofighter, or whether it's to look at the production of a smart motorway network, or whether it's to look at the adaptation and integration of digital ways of working into the way that government is delivered. These are very different projects with a very different focus, but they needed a way to understand what was good practice across project delivery, regardless of which industry or sector it was in. So they invested in a model that would be focused on the key characteristics of project delivery. This very quickly grew arms and legs and became in 2005 the Portfolio Program and Project Management Maturity Model, P3M3, which is the model that we're going to describe today. And its focus is enabling organizations in any sector to look at and measure their ability to deliver effectively the portfolios, programs, and projects that they are investing in, to ensure that their strategy is executed and they deliver the objectives and changes that they are in business to predict. Okay. And there have been, so as you can see, this model has evolved over time. So broadly every 4 or 5 years, it's the model is updated, new elements are integrated, new focus is brought into play, different levers are available to us as users of the model to ensure that it reflects the environment that we work in. This is developed by practitioners and used in portfolio office, project offices, used to look at the effectiveness of current investments day to day. This is a live model that continues to evolve, and you'll see that around about 25 October of last year, the model was, which has now come under the ownership of PeopleCert, who are a certification organization, owners of, amongst other things, the PRINCE2 project management standard. So they have rebranded the model so that it gains recognition across the widest possible audience by aligning it with the PRINCE2 brand. This is not to suggest that P3M3 is only for projects that use PRINCE2. It's a technique, branding technique that PeopleCert are using to call attention to the model and to share it with the widest possible audience by aligning it with their most popular brand. But the model is and remains a generic project program portfolio management strategy. It is not confined or constrained by adherence to any particular process or approach. It is a generic standard. So that's where we are today. Again, I'll try and move forward. Probably does it. There we go. So to talk a little bit about the maturity levels that are embedded within the model. As I said, there are 5 levels. 1 being the sort of entry level, and 5 being what is the maximum in terms of our progressive development that we can get. And any organization, as I said, the model is designed to help practitioners to understand about their capability maturity. So it has in its core an assessment model, so which can be accessed in a number of different ways, which we'll talk about later. But the idea is that you can, like attending the doctors, you can diagnose yourself, you can have a CAT scan, you can look at what the underlying factors are that control or constrain your capability and align them with characteristics that are set out in the model. So level 1, we might describe an organization at level 1 as it's awareness of process, right? This is not to say that organizations at level 1 are not producing successful results or successful projects, but they're not doing it through process efficiency. So their processes will be a little ad hoc. There'll be, there may be some projects will have a formal business case. Some projects will be authorized on a wing and a prayer. Some will have, some sort of reporting mechanism. Others following different governance. There is no consistent capability set out in the organization. No guidance necessarily that's followed. No controls that are always applied. And as a result, we get an ad hoc approach to, and so it becomes very difficult to understand what our capacity, what our capability to deliver multiple projects or programs is when we have no common model for delivery. Level 2, that is repeatable, is where we talk about some standardization or some consistency across the piece. So we may have 3 projects that you're running at the moment, all of which use the same written framework, all of which follow, produce recording their risks in a similar way. They all have a business case template that they've filled in there. If they're programs, they may have a communication plan that follows a common standard, right? But they will probably be inconsistently used. They may be sort of copy and paste kind of approach. This risk register pretty much looks like that risk register with a couple of names changed, or they were using the same thinking and the same presentation in our communication plans for each of our programs. Okay, some consistency, but it'd probably be limited, and the application will be, it will vary. Okay, at level 3, the defined process is where we see real progressive advantage for organizations, because at level 3 we have a defined standard, so we all know how we're supposed to manage and deliver our projects, and we follow that guidance. But critically, we're allowed to use our brains, so we're allowed to adapt a framework, not stick to it rigidly, and understand that we apply the right level of controls from our framework to the right type of project in order to get the best results. Level 4, managed process, is where we start to look at a continuous improvement kind of environment. So at level 4, organization is deliberately learning from experience and applying that learning to its projects and the way that it sets them up and runs them and processes. So taking data from our project performance and applying that data to decisions we make on new projects or the new rounds of projects. And level 5, an optimized process, this is where we would find we are using predictive technology, and we are looking at the pipeline out over time of projects that we're expecting to come in, thinking about the best capability that we're going to need to manage those, and putting that in place in order to ensure that we are quite precise about the methods that we use and the approach that we take to each of those projects. So, and that adds a high level of predictability to the way that we deliver our projects. So key metrics. Sorry, Sidra.
Can I ask, so obviously when you do this self-assessment, and I'm sure you will talk about how that works in your case studies, as a result, does the organization or the team who gets a self-assessment done learn, aside from the maturity levels, also the why? So why are we only on maturity 2? For example, you mentioned that, it is not consistently used certain templates, for example. So basically, this process helps teams and organizations identify the weak areas which require improvement, rather than just you are on maturity level 3.
Absolutely. And if we move forward to the next slide, I think I can probably start to explain how that works. The portfolio, the P3M3 model has, as I mentioned before, there are 3 sort of sub-models within it. So you can use it to look at the effectiveness of your portfolios, your programs, or your projects, or all 3, or your projects and your programs, etc. Because the overall structure of the model can be applied to each of them. But then to speak to your question, Sidra, about understanding what is, how do we derive that level score, you'll see that at the bottom of the temple of P3M3 there, that there are 7 perspective areas. That's what and you look at those whether you're looking at a portfolio or a program or a project. So you can see familiar topics like risk management, resource management, benefits or stakeholder management, organizational governance, which is the mechanisms that we put in place to ensure that projects and programs remain aligned with our strategic objectives, and management control, which are the controls we put in place to ensure that projects are governed and planned, and issues and changes are managed, and we do things with a level of consistency that helps us to keep our delivery within control. So that'd be familiar to any of our sort of project or program management audience. There are techniques that will be applied across all of those disciplines that you would expect to review during the process of an assessment, and that would help you to understand whether whether your organization has level 1, 2 or 3 or 4 characteristics of risk management or program management. So if we've got a common standard for analyzing risks, we've got a common way of writing them down and talking about them, and they regularly feature in our governance discussions, then you're certainly level 2. If you're doing that appropriate to the risk of the project, then there might be an argument that says you've got characteristics of a level 3 organization. But the process of assessment will reveal to you what the building blocks are of that level score, that maturity score.
Yeah, and the individual blocks like organizational governance, benefits management, they're not getting scored basically, but it is the overall maturity of either the projects, programs, portfolio, all 3.
That's what dictates the level, for sure.
Okay.
And you're only, so if you're level 3 for management control, benefits management and resource management, but only level 1 for risk management, then it's quite an exacting standard. So you would think that, until we raise that risk management capability as well, we'll continue to be level 1. Okay. But you are in an assessment, you will be, you'll get an idea of what, where you are in terms of the level for finance management, for example, and critically, what would be the progressive improvements that you could put in place. There's a blueprint for capability at each of the levels set out in the model. So you would have targets to work towards, or proposals or suggestions for where you can update or add resilience to that piece. Okay, so if I do a bit of that. So just to indicate, we've touched on it already, so I won't dwell on this, but the PRINCE2 P3M3 is now sort of positioned and branded as a member of the PRINCE2 framework. This is what this slide, I hope, indicates, is that it is aligned to, and there is certainly some there's some applicability in terms of design between the P3M3 model and portfolio management standards like management of portfolios, the PRINCE2 for program management, formerly known as managing successful programs, and PRINCE2 project management and PRINCE2 agile. Because they are owned by the same sort of design authority, then continuity will continue. And again, this is to emphasize that PRINCE2 P3M3 can be applied to and raise capability in project, program, and portfolio level. But again, just to leave that slide it's important to emphasize that it is a generic, P3M3 is a generic standard, and it features focus on projects or programs or portfolios that are used that are delivered using any different sort of PMI framework or IPMA framework or the APM framework. It's not framework specific. Okay. So again, to sort of bring that into sort of reality of how we would use it. So what we have here is a sort of generic example of the progression that you would make. If you would begin as a project or program organization with a benchmark, so that could be assessed. Your project or programs will be assessed for their control characteristics against the maturity model. And that would tell you that, as we're trying to suggest in the initial baseline diagram on the left here, that this is an organization that has got meets, for example, organizational governance is the top on the left there, and it meets all the descriptors at level 1 and all the descriptors at level 2. That's why it's green. And then some of the descriptors at level 3, which is green, a mixture of green and amber. Okay. And then none at 4 or 5. Right? Similarly, management control in that organization, level 1 and level 2, but nothing at level 3. You can see how that works. And by simply sort of looking at examples of practice and speaking to practitioners across the business, you can understand the degree to which those practices for risk management or benefits management or stakeholder management are being observed and delivered. And then you can figure out what the distribution of those is. Once you have a baseline, once you've got a measurement in place for that, and you'll have a figure for each of those 7 areas, you can determine which areas are critical to you to deliver your strategic advantage. Which area do we need to get better at, or do we want to enhance or make more resilient? So we work through a plan to add some strength or to add other aspects or other capabilities to our risk management, to our stakeholder management, and then remeasure. Once we execute the plan and remeasure. And so in this example, you would expect that if an organization is focused on organizational governance and management control, they will have embedded the techniques that are needed to excuse me, to be able to control delivery in that way. And it becomes a progressive model. So we can embed this in the assurance or the performance monitoring and management of your project or program organization, and easily sort of get a reading on where you are in terms of your development and how you are proceeding to embed the capabilities that will raise you up that level and give you that predictable ability and capability to deliver on your projects and programs. That makes sense. So it moves from baseline to transition to baseline as we move forward with developing our capability.
And so, do I understand correctly that at the end of the day, an organization which might get this result after their first ever assessment might say, we are a service organization, we have to work with a lot of suppliers, and in the past there were issues, and that will bring the highest benefit for us to improve on our stakeholder management and risk management, and because they are the lowest as well, and just focus on that to raise it. Okay.
It's so by splitting out these aspects of project delivery into those 7 areas, we can then have a conversation that is based on what are the key elements of the kinds of projects that we're going to do. Are we dealing with a lot of troublesome contracts and difficult suppliers? Our stakeholder management could be improved. Right? Are we dealing with a lot of high risk and uncertainty projects? We're doing a lot of research and development pieces this year with an uncertain impact. Maybe we should look at adding some resilience to our risk management. That would be consistent with achieving the success that we need, right? And you build progressively. Again, it's important to remember that capability maturity isn't linear. In a VUCA environment, there are some changes we're not going to be able to control. We'll have to pivot and deliver. And it's not unusual for an organization to deviate or waver a little bit in the acquisition of that capability. So redoing the assessment, redoing the benchmark will give you an up-to-date indicator or vector for what you need to be on top of and what you look to improve. Right?
So in today's environment, organization might choose to improve their risk management before the benefits management, maybe because there are a lot of risks.
Quite possibly, or they may already be really good at managing the benefits, or have a mature process for that. It will depend on the individual organization. So I wanted to briefly sort of summarize what the model can do. So at its focus, at its heart, is the idea of raising capability and performance, measurable performance in the way that we deliver our projects and programs. So it supports benchmarking. I was always taught that measurement precedes management. If we want to be able to understand how we are, if we're investing in the right areas and how we're getting the right results. So it's a model that has built into it the idea that you can benchmark. It also builds a common or shared language, and it enables us to be more specific about the characteristics of individual processes and focus on their improvement, which enables us to collaborate and work better together. So a defined process, level 3, is probably a prerequisite of the most effective collaboration we can do, because we understand how we can work collectively and work to and adapt to the different requirements of our projects. It enhances our efficiency, it enhances our effectiveness, because it helps us to focus on controls. So if we can stop a project from moving out of any of those areas of control by enhancing our control processes. So financial management, for example, will help us to be clear in our budgeting through our development of a maturing business case, and management control will help us to make sure that we control that spend through well understood processes and have an escalation process. Increased capability will come by raising our ability. We learn from our experience and embed the organization's capability in our process. Increases all ships rise in that instance. And it helps us also to manage our capacity by understanding what, when our projects are going to land, what are having some confidence in our prediction and our forecasting enables us to know much more precisely what we can deliver in this manner, and what we may have to resource slightly differently in order to do that. It has embedded with it an assessment toolkit, so you can self-assess, or you can move into a more sort of diagnostic assessment if more expressiveness and more granular detail is needed in order to fine-tune the diagnosis. And it contains within itself a blueprint for each capability at the next level up. So we can always see what the route map is, what we can do to add resilience and control to our projects.
And isn't it that you can also validate your expertise and maturity by the P3M3? Is it a certification you get if you go all the way?
This is a model that supports certification, and so it is possible for organizations or sections or departments of organizations to have an assessment that results in a standardized certification process. You can then sort of use that to notify your stakeholders and your clients or your suppliers that your project process, your program process, is resilient and has been standardized, and you can therefore engage with us with some confidence, because our processes have been proven to be or tested and proven to be resilient to a global international standard. So I wanted to talk to you a little bit about some examples. So thinking about an organization that has sort of quite fast turnaround international projects to position power plants, temporary power plants, to construction sites or to events, or to act as resilience for a network that's come under some strain. So this organization was very much a project organization, and a lot of their success was based on delivering very challenging projects into territories that were very demanding potentially. So current conflict or immediately post-conflict territories, not uncommon. Working in parts of the world that were quite remote, so not especially urban, with security requirements and so on. And they involved the transition across the world of power generation facilities, right? So they were a successful organization in a growth period, but they were succeeding because of the caliber of the people and the nature of the teams that they had, and their ability to complete the work. Okay? When they tested their processes and looking for ways to improve, they're using the P3M3 model. The process maturity was low. Okay, and similarly, there was very little continuity from one region to another. So projects were managed in the South America is very different from the way they were managed in EMEA or in West Africa, for example. Right? And so that meant that there were blind spots in the way that they delivered. Okay, it was hard to implement standardized controls because the projects were being led by people who were with a lot of experience of sort of localized problem solving, but not necessarily sort of process management, right? The appetite for risk was very difficult to standardize across the piece, and it would be dominated by regional sales vice presidents determining, you know, which was the most attractive of the projects in terms of return, rather than perhaps the most sort of risky. And then similarly, business cases not standardized, so their financial management was very variable following the assessment. And so they needed to, in order to be able to add capability and add capacity to their delivery, they needed to move towards standardization. So to set up for success, we worked with them to support them in developing the business case capability of their international teams, introducing a standardized format and template for different types of project, but making sure that there was a defined approach to how we would assess any particular opportunity. Also finding ways to support the project managers who would be variably engaged in a lot of sort of engaging with, you know, with customs officials, or ensuring that machinery was transited appropriately, taking some of the admin out of that piece and putting that back into a hub, freeing up the capacity of the team to deliver, and bringing a central view to risk management. The way that risk was managed, there was consistency in the way that commercial risk in particular was managed. And a combination of these elements enabled them to meet a very challenging growth target of 100% growth every sort of 3 years, which was their investment target. But they did this by effectively doubling the capacity of the PMs to lead complex projects. So they by removing some of by standardizing on administration and removing some of the expectation that they would have to perform all the tasks and all of the hidden work, rather than manage a process, they freed up capacity to deliver more and more complex projects, which is where their key growth target was. And you know, when they were able to validate that and assess that through a certification assessment, which showed that they'd moved from a level 1 ad hoc process to a level 3.5 defined process with some characteristics at level 4. That was
How long did it take them to move it from 1 to 3.5?
So the distance between the two certification processes was 18 months. Okay, but the part of that was done with they were able to take design decisions about the improvements they would make quite quickly, but they had distributed workforce across, you know, multiple different continents, and so rolling out those changes was something that happened in a sequence, just because of their capacity to operate whilst still changing their while changing their processes while still operating and delivering their complex projects, right? So that was the sort of key controller on the pace at which they moved it out. But it's certainly not unrealistic to move from level 1 and level 3 within a sort of 12 to 18 month process, depending on the, you know, an organization will have different numbers of projects or areas it wants to target. But that's the way that works. Okay, so we're going backwards for some reason. Come backwards again. This is exciting. And there we go. So another organization. So this slightly different challenges. This is an organization that's building a nuclear power station, or in fact a series of organizations working in partnership to build a nuclear power station, using a lot of experienced overseas resource in the territory to guide the construction of this facility and to apply the sort of technology in the right way. This organization, when assessed, had relatively high maturity written processes. Okay? But as part of the assessment that we would undertake on their behalf, it was evident that the application of those processes was hugely inconsistent. So the P3M assessment process isn't a desk review. We don't just look at your documents and then tell you what you'd like us to say. It involves sampling, and it involves evidence-based surveillance. Okay, and so if you've got really great processes written down, that's good. But if you're not following those processes, then that isn't an indicator of capability, right? So and this organisation was also going through a quite key pivot in the economic conditions of the territory, which meant that they were having to introduce cost controls and apply them in a way that they hadn't previously been expected to in the earlier phases of mobilisation of the project. And as a result, they had a mixture of controls that were written down but not applied, and new controls that they needed to get on top of very quickly. So in terms of their blind spots, there was a huge gap between process and application, and that needed to change, because they needed to rewrite some of their processes, fantastically detailed and beautiful though they were, to be something people could actually use, and then use in a sensible way. The governance of the construction project was very much focused on current day-to-day operations, and the construction of the whole facility and its engagement with the electricity network, which was being managed as a program, were quite sort of separate from each other. So in an assessment of portfolio governance and an assessment of program and project governance identified that there was quite a big disconnect between the organizational governance of project and the programs, right? Basically, they didn't trust what they were saying to each other, and they weren't aligned to provide useful information to deliver. So a couple of things. In order to upskill the domestic workforce to work in processes that they could comfortably apply, that were not so complex but more immediately applicable, and so we worked with them to gain some of those cost control and planning control skills, and also focused improvements particularly around the financial management area, to ensure that the budgeting was more under control and predictable, and further to make sure that reporting from projects could be aligned to the decisions that were needing to be taken at the program level, and help them to move forward together in lockstep. And by achieving that unification, which only came through a detailed understanding of their project and program processes, we were able to help them to align around new cost controls that could escalate up from projects to the programs, and ensure that there was a capability that was in place to apply consistently the newly defined controls that they had. And their maturity was reassessed, along with the capability of their individual teams. So we used the APM competence framework, and also to raise ability in individual roles, and that helped them to have a much more resilient capability with a much more predictable outcome for delivering their targets. My third insight is another international organization. Again, they're very much a project organization engaged in, for example, building new terminals, or building an airline staff check-in building, or understanding the way that their digital controls were working as for people processing luggage through the airports, and the way that they're working at the sort of portfolio level. And so the organizational governance of the portfolio level and the organizational governance and management control of the project level were similarly quite separate. And there was a noticeable disconnect between portfolio management office and the project leadership. And that led to a lack of ability to pivot or adjust during times of commercial pressure or economic change. It's hard for the organization to steer at the portfolio level when there isn't a proper connection to project delivery. Okay, the assessment showed that in terms of management control and organizational governance, that their reporting was not standardized, and so both written reporting, dashboard preparation, and project review were not coordinated against a particular strategic path, and the information couldn't be relayed successfully from project level up to program level, which led to a sort of a breakdown in trust between the two sort of delivery layers. In order to address that, we used the findings around organizational governance and management control to set up a reporting a routine that was in alignment, help them to focus on, to have the ability to focus on any of the controls that the portfolio directors deemed to be important for this quarter, and help them to standardize on the tools for reporting and for prediction and the capabilities of their in-house PMs to respond to that challenge. So we were able to raise the game of the project delivery level by helping them to standardize on controls and on a reporting approach that was aligned to the requirements of the portfolio. And the impact of that is that there was a transition from projects leading the portfolio almost, because governance decisions were taken at a level that was too far below the strategic, but it seemed to be having impact to a strong central portfolio office being able to guide and coordinate the direction of those projects through a governance link that worked. The development simultaneously of a core of domestic project managers that had access to the right level of processes and controls and techniques to be able to function fully in the role, and created, I guess, a sort of a little cohort of rising stars that were leading the maturation of that project process and supporting the direction of the CPMO. So again, different experiences as the different scope of the assessments look at different levels of the business, but at its heart is a process. Let's see if we can move that on. Go backwards again. I don't suppose you could move the slide on too for me, could you, Sidra?
Of course, yeah.
Sorry.
And
that's the fella. Thank you.
Yeah.
So what do those experiences all have in common? They all use the P3M3 model to help to determine their capability and to add resilience to their delivery in everybody loves a closed loop model, right? And our version of this is that you look at your capability through the lens of the P3M3. You go through a process review to understand where the development opportunities are and where you can deliver more consistently or in a way that's more geared to the challenges of your environment. We have analysis. Then we'll look at who's doing what and are the roles being supported and developed in the best way. Where there are gaps in that capability, you can target a performance for an intervention. And then if in order to respond to a progressive development in your process, you can look to add new controls, look to change the way that you're briefing and training people, look to update your practices aligned with the higher level maturity in the blueprint, and then measure your performance continually against not only your progress up the maturity curve, but also, of course, the delivery of your objectives. So each of those organizations benefiting from the ability to put a number, put a measure on their capability, but then critically to translate that in ways that suit them for the delivery of their objectives. Okay.
So we have actually a question. I don't know, do we have another slide, Mike? I will quickly have a look.
I think the next slide is questions and answers.
Okay, yes, perfect. Because we just received 2 questions, so I let you speak in more detail because there were no questions, but suddenly now we have received a couple of questions and I hope to answer some of those at least. So Jörg is asking, he's saying, I'm not sure if we hear mixture project process with operational processes within the maturity curve. Each project is unique as per definition. So how to repeat processes for unique projects? Maybe you claim following project management approaches, for example, PRINCE2 already fulfills the criteria of a defined process, and following MSP already fulfills the criteria of managed process. Nonetheless, I do not see a way to optimize processes for all unique projects. It's a long question.
Sure. I mean, my reflection is that part of the optimization happens in the practice. So the optimization would include looking at the way, and let's take an example. If we looked at the way that we were managing risk or managing resources, let's say, on a project, there will be, if you think about resources, you might think about the way you'd resource an agile project, for example. You would resource that through a team that is empowered to work within fixed periods of time and to have a certain amount of capacity to put that, directed by somebody saying this is going to add most value to our solution. Okay? And you would resource that very differently from a construction project where you've got a design process you've got to get through, and you commit certain resources to the execution of a design. It starts with the outline concept, then goes through the design, then leads to the detailed design, and so on. And you would resource that perhaps quite differently with a lot more predictability in the second project rather than in the first. But that all constitutes information about how you have effectively managed that resource management process on a range of projects.
Okay.
You might use different approaches for the two, but you would also then, as part of a higher level maturity approach, is you would have that reflection and learning from experience that says this is what we took from those two different approaches, and this is how we will refine our process for our next agile project or for our next waterfall project.
Okay. I think it is a very detailed question, and there's the MSP aspect and the PRINCE2 aspect in the question. So I'm sure, Mike, you can say much more about that as well to answer the question. I suggest, Jörg, you are welcome to have a quick chat with Mike about that. And also, we have one more question which we are now unable to answer. Unfortunately, we overrun a little bit. But Ulrich, we will get. I have your question. I will put it in front of Mike, and I will email you with the answer to your question. Really apologies for that. But what I would like to do before we close off the session, thank you, Mike, first of all, is to remind everyone about our next webinar, KI im Projektmanagement. Das findet am 13. Mai statt. Und ihr könnt euch wieder anmelden für dieses Webinar, und ich hoffe, ihr seid dabei. Und bevor wir uns jetzt verabschieden, Mike hat freundlicherweise angeboten, dass, falls Interesse ist, dass ihr eine kostenfreie Beratungssitzung mit dem Mike zum Thema P3M3 und mit mir durchführen könnt, Fragen stellen könnt, Beispiele sehen könnt und vielleicht einfach eine kleine kurze Beratung, wie es für euch aussehen könnte. Wir haben auch so ein Self-Assessment P3M3, so eine Mini-Version, die dann Mike mit euch durchführen kann. Falls Interesse besteht, kommt einfach auf mich zu und wir buchen euch einen individuellen Termin. Damit möchte ich mich ganz herzlich bedanken und schön, dass ihr dabei wart, und thank you also, Mike, for you. Goodbye from us. Thank you.